Question number 1 in the name of the Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by all his government's policies?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes. In particular, our policies that support racial harmony every day of the year, and the policies that support the rule of law, particularly when it comes to extradition.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it a measure of the success of 5.5 years of his economic and social policies when new census data shows that the income gap between Auckland's poorest and richest communities has widened?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the government rejects the view that income inequality is widening in New Zealand.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Is it a measure of the success of his economic and social policies when the census data shows that the incomes of those living in South Auckland has fallen significantly over the last 7 years, while incomes in wealthier areas has risen by thousands of dollars?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, it's a measure of success when the government will have returned the books back to surplus after inheriting a complete and utter mess from the previous government, having to endure the global financial crisis and, of course, standing behind the people of Christchurch. Mr. Speaker, it's not a measure of success when you have to take to the country and all of its citizens and make them suffer some form of inconvenience and cost, which has been the case from the Australian budget because they inherited a Labour Greens government and their policies.
Supplementary question.
Point of order.
Order. Point of order, Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was a very specific question. The Minister failed to address anything to do with income inequality.
Order. The question started was, is it a measure of success? And what the Prime Minister then did, talked about how he would measure success.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Is it a measure of success of his economic and social policies when census data, actual census data, reveals that a whole South Auckland community's incomes have actually gone backwards by up to 20% in real terms over the last 7 years?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It's a measure of success when the government, having inherited the economic mess that was delivered to it in 2008, it managed to support policies like working for families for the least well-off New Zealanders in the most difficult time.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it a measure of success of his economic and social policies when, in the New Zealand we live in now, the richest 1% of New Zealanders now own 16% of all the wealth in the country, while half of all New Zealanders own just 5% of the wealth?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, it's a measure of success when the National-led government over the last 5.5 years could turn around the absolute mess we inherited from the previous Labour government, their large spending policies and their inefficiencies that they had built in the economy, while at the same time standing behind Christchurch, making sure that there was over $15 billion there to support the people of Christchurch, maintaining working for families and accommodation supplements, and building a more efficient and effective New Zealand. And tomorrow, New Zealanders, I think, will reflect on the success of this national government and contrast it with what can only be described as a real mess that Tony Abbott had to inherit in Australia after a Labour Greens government.
Supplementary question. Order. Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Is it a measure of success of his economic and social policies when the NBR Rich List shows that the total wealth of New Zealand's 100 or so richest individuals has soared by 50% since National took over government, while working New Zealanders are still waiting for a real pay rise?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, it's a real measure of success when 1,500 people a week are leaving welfare for work, when 84,000 jobs are created, when we have one of the fastest growing economies in the OECD, Mr Speaker, when we are exporting to parts of the world at record levels. Mr Speaker, one thing that can be taken from that member's questions, and that is something that runs through both the Green Party and the Labour Party, and that is they are not ambitious for New Zealanders to do well.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is it a measure of success of his 5.5 years of economic and social policies when middle-class families have been hit with a 20% increase in electricity prices, and on top of that they're facing a 34% increase in the price of the median house prices?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, at one level it probably is a measure of success when power prices have only gone up 20%, given they went up 72% under the previous Labor government. Mr Speaker, but the one thing we do know is that if Labor and the Greens were to become the government, power prices will rise by much more than that because of the expensive ETS, because of the electricity reforms that the members want to undertake. And I'm so much looking forward to making sure that New Zealanders understand exactly how much they'll have to pay extra per week under those kinds of policies while they're in the dole queue, because that's where they'll be when enough jobs have been destroyed under those people.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Isn't it actually a measure of the failure of his 5.5 years of economic and social policies when the facts show that the wealthy are better off, the middle classes are struggling to get on top of their bills, and the poor are falling further behind under this government?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, well, the facts actually show quite a different picture, but what the facts also show is that after 5.5 years of good economic leadership by the government and a huge amount of hard work by New Zealanders, this country's on track to be back on surplus, one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And, Mr Speaker, I think that there are many Australians who will look across the Tasman today and say, oh, the lucky country over there, it's called New Zealand.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is the Prime Minister seriously trying to claim that the census data, which has been released very recently, that shows that the poorest communities in South Auckland have gone back by 20%, while the richest communities are thousands of dollars richer, that census data is simply false?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, what I am saying is I don't accept the interpretation of that data as presented by the member.
Supplementary
question, Dr. Russell Norman.
After nearly 6 years in government, 6 long years in government, isn't it time to accept the evidence that shows that his policies have made the poor poorer, the rich richer, and everyone else is struggling to get by, and it's time to stop blaming someone else for his own failures?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, far from blaming anyone for failures, the government is actually very proud of its record of supporting the least well-off New Zealanders, supporting New Zealanders right through the recession and rebuilding things. All I can say is I really hope when the member was out the .com mansion drinking champagne with his feet up.
Order. That won't. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell. Order. Dr. Russell Norman.
Is the Prime Minister proudest of the fact that he increased the wealth of the 100 or so richest people in the country by 50%, or is he proudest of the fact that he drove down the income of people in South Auckland by 20% in real terms, i.e. you made the rich richer and the poor poorer?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I reject the assertions in the member's argument, but I'm proudest of the fact that I didn't go grovelling to the .com mansion. A man who supports a racist day and a man who wanted a favour from him in government to make sure he wasn't extradited from New Zealand.
Order. 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 I take it this is a point of order?
Yes, it is, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, I raise a point of order under Standing Order 383 around the content of replies. The Prime Minister, in the answers to Russell Norman's questions, for two of them strayed well beyond his responsibilities and you didn't pull him up. He then strayed beyond his responsibilities and you did pull him up. And then in the next answer, he did exactly the same thing you set him down for. That is actually challenging your ruling. And you have told members on this side of the House, when we do that, we'll be out, and you've thrown people out.
Order.
He has to have the same...
Order. 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 What I do is listen very carefully to the question as well. And in that last particular question, there was a lot of political loading with the Prime Minister driving up the wealth of the richest 100 and driving down the situation of the poorest 20%. Order! So it was, in my interpretation, a political question, and that gave the Prime Minister a fair amount of licence. That's the way I interpreted that situation. Order. 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 I have a point of order from Tracy Martin. Tracy Martin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I just seek clarification from you either now or later? The Prime Minister and... The Prime Minister, I believe, just accused Russell Norman of going to somebody's mansion to gain something, and previous...
Order. Order. This is a point of order, and it must be heard in silence.
And previously, you actually, I believe it was yesterday, stood up and quite clearly made a ruling that to impugn somebody's reputation in such a way was not appropriate in this House. So I'm not sure how there is a difference between accusing one group of people from taking something and another group of people taking something. It appears to be a double standard, sir. Order. Point of order.
Order. Order. The member will resume his seat. There was an interjection. I don't know where it came from, but it was down that corner. Order! I'm on my feet. And if we're going to have a repetition of yesterday with people interjecting when I'm on my feet, someone will have to leave. Now, the interjection was completely unnecessary and was not satisfactory. I require that member who said it to stand and withdraw and apologise.
Withdraw and apologise.
Now, point of order from the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr. Speaker, I think the person who raised that point of order, Tracy Martin, misses the point. The question was asked of the Prime Minister, and forgive my repeating of it because it's a mangling of the English, what was he most proudest of? He then gave an answer saying that what he was most proudest of. He should have been most proud of, but that's the Australianisation of our parliamentary language, Mr. Speaker. And in that event, there was nothing at all unparliamentary in the way in which he gave the answer. He is very proud that he hasn't grovelled to .com.
Order. Order. It is a matter of whether... The last part of the Prime Minister's answer made a suggestion to the member asking the question. If he's offended by that, then he should immediately take a point of order and say that he's offended by that. Order. Well, I'm on my feet. I'm on my feet, if the member had noticed. So that is the proper procedure. So I accept now that we'll allow Russell Norman to, if he raises a point of order that he's offended, then I will be asking somebody to withdraw that last part.
I take offence by the Prime Minister's comment.
Order. In that case, the members take... Order. No. Order. I'll deal with this first. Dr. Russell Norman has taken offence at the last part of the Prime Minister's answer. I therefore ask the Prime Minister to stand and withdraw that part of his answer.
I withdraw.
Point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr. Speaker, it does raise the question about how Russell Norman could be offended by something the Prime Minister didn't do.
Order. That is not the point. The point, order, the point is a member has been offended in this House by a comment that was made. Quite frequently, members take offence at a comment. I'm surprised they do, but that's not for me to determine. If a member takes offence, I will require the member who offended that member to withdraw. Now, we have a further point of order from the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, and there are 2 points. The first is that I find myself in the unusual position of defending the Prime Minister and disagreeing with Russell Norman. But, sir, the standing orders and Speaker's rulings are very clear, and that is if offence is taken, it must be taken immediately at the first opportunity. It wasn't. These things are not able to be backdated. The second point, sir, is that you are still the arbiter of whether it is reasonable for someone to take offence. Otherwise, sir, people could say they're offended at things which are entirely unobjectionable. And I think for you to say that if someone's offended, you'll require withdrawal goes too far.
Order. And there will be, no, I'll hear from the member if it's necessary, there will be on some occasions a situation where I can't see any possibility of an offence and I won't bother. But on this case, let's face it, some members are more sensitive than others about comments that are thrown around this House. It should have been raised immediately, but I accept there was a bit of hurly-burly and there were interjections around points of order. I will decide when to accept it. Point of order, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, I would invite you, sir, to have a look at the tape of question 1 in the interests of good order in the House. Sir, several things strike me listening to the exchange which has followed. Sir, the first is that there were several repeat offences, as my colleague Mr Robertson has said, which were not pulled up by your good self. The second is that in the last answer, the Prime Minister went on at some length in a conversation which was personal, which was derogatory and which was out of order, and he was allowed to continue, sir. And, sir, what I would submit for your consideration is that your leniency to the Prime Minister has encouraged the kind of disorder from the government benches which is now undermining your standing in this House,
order,
sir.
Order.
And I would invite you to have a consideration.
Order. The member is now getting into very dangerous ground where he's effectively suggesting bias in the way I'm interpreting the rules. I always review the Hansard after question time. I look very carefully at the way I've handled it, and I accept the invitation raised by the member. I will be doing it later on this afternoon. Supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is the Prime Minister proud of the fact that under his government, the richest 1% of New Zealanders now own 16% of all the wealth in the country, while half of New Zealanders own just 5% of the wealth?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, I can't verify the facts, but I'm pretty sure that one of those 1% is Kim.com.
Question number 2, Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. To the